Good evening, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about the approach referring to deductive and inductive that goes for language learning. In classrooms, we know that there are different kind of activities and methods that we can use in order for students to learn in different ways. And well, this specific approach or approaches help us to understand how it can be worked by the teacher or by the students in some different situations or ways. For example, it says that the deductive approach refers to the lesson that is introduced in a more teacher-centered way. This means that the teacher is the one who is responsible for presenting a new grammar point, some vocabulary, etc., explains it, and then the student, with some different examples, practice this explanation that the teacher already had. That is the way the deductive approach works. On this matter, authors like Bob Adams has mentioned once that the deductive approach is often criticized, especially because it's grammar-centered most of the time from the teacher's points of view. It gives a little attention to the meaning of what the students are really doing. And another activity that is important to consider is that the activities that are done by the students are a little mechanical, in the sense that they are not really thinking about anything else but just following the ideas that the teacher already explained, with the different rules that he or she had for the students to check, to understand, and then to practice in workbooks, activities to do in class, or in different worksheets that they are checking in this specific matter. There are other authors like John Heard in 2015 that mentioned the deductive approach is more like a top-down activity that goes from a specific general idea to specific ideas in this matter to consider, especially because the deductive approach in this sense refer to different activities that the students have to do according to the teacher's explanation, and how he explains or she explains these different activities for the students to understand them on this specific matter. It goes from the generalization of a rule for the students to understand the specific examples that are shown in a class. Also, Thornberry in 1999 refers to the deductive approach as a rule-driven activity, pretty much as the way the other authors mentioned it before, where this activity or this approach starts with different rules that are presented to students for them then to check some different examples with the rules applied, so the students can work with these different activities and ideas according to what they are seeing in this matter. So those are some of the important ideas for the deductive approach, and that are important to consider with information that they are checking on this sense. Now, talking about the inductive approach, this is more like a student-centered idea, where the students have the chance to analyze information that is seen in class, check what they are checking with different activities in the books, in their notebooks, with the classes, and that are checking with the teacher. So they are the ones who start thinking and using their critical ideas for them to understand how some grammar points or some examples that they check in class actually works. For example, it says that the inductive approach is more, as I mentioned it before, as a student-centered activity, where the teacher presents examples for them to analyze them and for them to get the idea how the rule of these specific examples actually work. So on this matter, of course, the students go or use their prior knowledge. They get an idea of the information that they see with different examples or different classes that you checked before, so they can get to the conclusion on how this specific grammar point works according to the examples that are presented, without the teacher showing them any kind of rules or explaining them anything. So the students have the opportunity to understand them on this matter. So that is one of the important ideas related with the inductive approach in this sense. It is important to consider also for the inductive approach that has many advantages depending on the kind of students and groups that we have as teachers for them to check. For example, it says on this specific idea that the inductive approach in this sense encourages students to use their reasoning skill, mental process, and their prior knowledge, as I mentioned it before, for them to understand how they can work with these specific examples and how they can analyze examples that they see in class for them to get to a conclusion and to understand what they are seeing. And more than that, they also apply that information by themselves, maybe only with a teacher guidance, but without really explaining them what to do, no, in this specific sense. Also, it is said that the inductive approach on this matter has other important advantages to consider. It is said, again by Young here in 2015, that this activity refers more to a bottom-up activity or a bottom-up method, where it goes from the specific examples to the general idea of the rule. As we mentioned before, when this author was talking about the deductive approach, he talks that going from the general to specific, but with inductive approach it goes backwards from the specific ideas to the general rule that needs to be understood by the students in this different sense, with information that they are checking and the examples that they are practicing in class. On the other hand, Turnbury in 1999 as well mentioned that the inductive approach is more like a rule discover, as I mentioned it before. The students are the ones who have to get the idea of what the examples are made of, what kind of vocabulary it has, what kind of tense it actually refers, and what ideas these specific examples have with the context of the situation, a reading, or maybe a project that the students are doing, for them to understand how this actually works. So the inductive approach, as Turnbury in 1999 says it, refers to the rule discover, where it starts with some examples of the rule that are specified in the classes for them to understand, for the students to understand the rule on how these examples work when they infer it in this specific matter. I mean, they check the examples that are seen in class, so they have the opportunity then to understand how the example that they check work by inferring this specific rule specifically. By being redundant by myself, I think I make that example clear, no, on this matter. Now, when we decide as teachers how to work with the deductive and the inductive approach, we can understand that it has to depend, or it depends actually, on the teacher. The teacher in this matter says that makes a big difference in the decision of any of the both approaches to use in class for different classes that we take. Of course, we need to consider that if we have a group of students that are kind of slow-paced to work or have problems to understand new vocabulary or new grammar concepts when they see them for the first time, probably the inductive approach is not the best way to go with them. Probably the deductive approach is more reliable for these kind of students, so they can understand different rules and they can work together with the teacher on how, with a specific rule, they can work with some examples and how they can understand and analyze these examples once explanation has been made by the teacher. On the other hand, it is said as another specific or important advantage for the inductive approach with this author Bob Adamson, that one of the important ideas is that it is a good example to consider, or a good approach to consider, for the students that are highly motivated to get new information and to understand what they are actually seeing. And when they actually like to discover and understand the different rules, that they are working with examples that they see. I mean, in this specific matter, the students pay more attention to what they are checking in class, and without the teacher, they are trying to understand the information that they are seeing by themselves in order to get to the idea of the rule, again by themselves, with what they are actually doing, or with examples that they are working with. So it is very important to understand that if we have highly motivated students that are willing to work on this matter, well, they can do it this specific way. And of course, we need to understand that an inductive approach in this sense has to do with the students' knowledge and intelligence. I mean, if we have really smart students group, probably these students who can go back to their prior knowledge, infer a lot of information, probably the best way to go with these specific groups or students might be the inductive approach. On the other hand, the deductive approach is more referred to slow-paced students who need to work a little bit more on an explanation before going to examples for them to discover. No, I personally can tell you guys that I like to work with both approaches when I'm teaching my classes, especially with the students that have a hard time probably to work. I usually use the deductive approach for them to understand how the information is worked or how the information is considered or explained, so they can have the ability to practice with these rules I explained them after the class had been seen on this matter. On the other hand, when I have had smarter students, I have used the inductive approach for them to understand how a specific rule works based on different examples that they see. And of course, this has to do, as I mentioned it before, and some of the authors here that I mentioned too refer to it, that the inductive approach refers to these ideas on prior knowledge and